Hello, everybody. This has been what we call a fast turnaround stream where we hit go live as quickly as humanly possible because a thing has happened. Hello, everybody. Thomas Burkhardt here, news director for NASA Spaceflight. You've probably heard my voice before if you've turned into an NSF stream. Right now, normally this is the point where I would say it's not just me, but right now it's just me. That'll just give us a couple minutes to get some other people logged on because SpaceX just decided to lift the ship with no warning or anything. So here we are. Ship 24 appears to be lifted off of Booster 7. Of course, last night we saw them stack it for the first time, these two vehicles. And yeah, they've already destacked it. We're going to talk a little bit into what this might entail. We're also going to take a second to type to some people and said, get people logged in here because I don't want it to be just me. I want to be able to have enough people to answer everyone's questions. As usual, if you have any questions about what's going on, please tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. I'll bring those in as well as we can. But yeah, you can see in this view that there's already a gap between Ship 24 and Booster 7, so they have already started the lift. And we'll keep an eye on what exactly they're going to do. Is this a full destack? Most likely. There could be a couple different reasons why this could be happening. We haven't heard any word about, what's going on. It could have just been a fit check. So they could have lifted the ship yesterday and were simply testing some connections, did that, and then they're done. And now they're going to destack the ship. Keep in mind, we were talking yesterday that we were actually kind of confused that they were already going into a full stack. The original plan would have been, we're going to do some more static fires. They only fired up to 7 engines at once on the booster so far, and we kind of assumed they would work their way up to 33 before a full stack happened, or at least fire more engines than 7. So perhaps this is okay, we did a quick fit check, now we can resume the normal booster test campaign. Other options are there was something wrong with the stack. Either they went to do a fit check of some kind and it didn't pass for some reason, and they need to destack the vehicles to work on that. That's certainly a possibility and wouldn't be that surprising. Remember, the only other vehicles that were full stacked like that were Booster 4 and Ship 20, and those vehicles were pretty different. In fact, it's very possible they even reworked some of the connections between those two vehicles. Elon had said in the past that these kind of vehicle pairs all have upgrades between them, especially this early in the development program. Almost each pair of vehicles is actually different in a lot of different ways. So it's also possible they're working some sort of issue. They could also just reseat this. And I see a question in chat asking, it's not actually guaranteed that they put the ship all the way down to the ground. They could just lift it up and then reconnect it if that's what the problem, kind of requires. But the best way to find out is going to be to watch and see. All we know is that they have disconnected the ship and it is currently being held up by the chopstick arms. It's not sitting on the booster anymore. So that's what we're looking at right now. I'll keep bringing some questions in, and I'll also see what other voices do we have lined up here. But yeah, again, tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. But just to recap, we have gone live super quickly just because this started happening and we didn't really have a lot of notice. Normally there are warning signs for these things. And so here we are, and we're going to, enter our usual coverage here. All right, I think I've got another voice to join me here so far. Sawyer, you on comms with us?
I am indeed.
Hey, Sawyer, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Again, a little scramble here, the D-stack, but happy to have more Starbase coverage.
Welcome back to this. What is this? Your second Starbase stream? This is
Second
the
Starbase,
chaos
yeah.
This is the chaos that Starbase can bring. Welcome to the team.
Thank you. Yeah, the first one was B7 going out there, and then I edited the video yesterday of the stack, and now here we are again.
So you're joining our coverage here, and yeah, basically Ship 24 being unstacked to destacked. I think destacked is the word we're going to use. But yeah, Sawyer, what are your thoughts? What do you think SpaceX might be up to, given that they just stacked this vehicle last night?
It's really interesting. Again, as mentioned, I was editing the video for the stack last night, and I was watching it, and it did seem a little strange, some of the pauses as they were working it down. I understand that they lowered a bit, pause to check, lower it and pause, but it did seem like, I don't know, something just felt a little off as they were working to align it. So maybe, I don't know if it's an alignment issue or if once it was stacked, they saw some alignment balance issue. I'm not sure. Again, all guessing at the moment, but it's very interesting to see how quickly they did the turnaround to taking 24 off of Booster 7.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know like what's normal or not, considering we've only seen a couple lifts. There definitely were points where they like paused or reworked things right near the end too, when they were starting to interface the ship and the booster. There was definitely moments of they were kind of sitting around or it wasn't going. I guess it wasn't going smoothly. At least what we think would be a smooth operation, but it's hard to know because they've only done this a handful of times. They're
It
always
almost
changing
appeared like
things,
they
of
were
course.
lifting it down and then back up again, little bits at a
Mhm.
time.
Chat's wondering if we think it's possible they were testing the separation mechanisms, I guess, between the two vehicles. I don't think you would do that, like, with the chopstick arms, because that's nowhere near the situation you'll have, like, in flight or anything. I think that's the kind of thing that you can just test the individual components on the ground, and then obviously they'll get a more thorough test in flight, but yeah, I don't know if that's a thing you do with the chopstick arms. Maybe, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can really test it until it is in flight at full force, at least. But unless it's just testing how well they detach now that we actually have them on top of each other, because this is the first time I believe that 24 is on 7.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, so I'll keep eyes on the questions here. We've got another one here from Alfredo saying, does the booster need to be pressurized to support Starship on top? If not, why not? We touched on this yesterday, and Sawyer, please jump in if you know more. I don't know if we know 100% one way or the other. I think we kind of presume that both of the vehicles are like partially pressurized. They're probably not at flight pressures, but they're partially pressurized just for some extra strength. What would you think, Sawyer?
That's my thought as well. The way it looks at, again, you need that extra strength, which the pressurization helps give because of those cylindrical shapes. So it would make sense if it was slightly pressurized. It was also interesting as they were working on attaching 24 to the chopsticks, it seemed like there was some kind of pressure vent. It may not even be related, but right beforehand, it looked like there was some kind of vent near it on the ground. So it's possible.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, I'm gonna bring in one more voice here. I think we got our initial commentary stream logged on short notice here. Mr. Chris Gebhardt, assistant managing editor for NASA Spaceflight. Thanks for hopping on. How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. How about yourself, Thomas?
I'm doing well. Nothing like a short notice Starbase stream. It's been a while since we had one like this, but it's happened before. But yeah, thank you so much for hopping on short notice, both you and Sawyer, so that we can answer some questions and try to figure out what the heck SpaceX is doing.
That sounds good to me.
Let me
That's always the
see.
$1 million question.
Right.
Now we got some questions here. Some people in chat are talking about lines still connected to the ship, and I've been trying to look at these camera views to see what they might be talking about. Either of you know? Is it something? Is it between the QD arm and the ship? There's like some connections that have been made. I'm looking closely. I can't tell if that's what I'm
Are
seeing.
there, or is that just an angle
Yeah, it's hard to tell
difference
from that
making it
angle.
look? Yeah.
That's what I think chat's talking about. And if that's the case, then I don't know if they can actually destack the vehicle because, well, how are you gonna? Unless you can make those, lose those connections remotely. I'm trying to figure. Were those connected by? Did people go up the tower and like access the QD arm and make those connections, or were those things that are like part of the QD system and you don't need people to connect or disconnect it? That's a question I have. Trying to catch up here because apparently we missed this.
Yeah. No. No. Yeah. Sorry. I was. Yeah. You are correct. Yeah. They did go up last night, and they did make those connections. Yeah.
Okay, so this then sounds like an indication that they're not actually destacking, because how are they going to disconnect those cables, right?
I mean, I believe earlier I was watching Starbase Live, and it looks like they were doing work with the SQD, kind of moving it away and moving it back. I don't know if
Yeah,
there are
they were
any
doing a lot of
connections
that.
yeah, I don't know if any connections were added or removed during that point, though.
Some people in chat asking if they could just be realigning it in some way. I saw one person ask if they have to like rotate the ship. I don't think the chopsticks have the ability to do that because the lift points are only on the two sides of the vehicle. But I also don't. I think the ship is in the right orientation. It sounds like this is so based on those cables and the fact that it's still connected to the QD arm in that way. This looks more like they're lifting it, a little bit, but they're not gonna lower the ship to the ground, and they're gonna try to realign this in some way.
There's that possibility. There's also a possibility that these are little pull away things that there was no need to disconnect them because as soon as you move it, it'll just disconnect.
Maybe.
Just like it will do on liftoff potentially. Depending on depending on what lines they actually run. Aside from just the fueling quick disconnect, that might pull away as the vehicle lifts off. There's also that possibility too. It's possible it's a realignment. Yeah, this is part of the fun of them doing all this out in the open for everyone to see because of the size of the system.
Right, yeah. So I'm going to tie in some discussions that we had yesterday, and again, at NASASpaceflight in chat, if you want to ask some questions, I'll keep an eye out for those as well. But yesterday we were talking about how it does seem a little odd that they went with the full stack last night for a couple of reasons. First of all, we would have probably guessed that there were more engine tests on the booster in store than what we've already seen. And so that's question mark number one. Question mark number two is that they had those lift points on the top of the ship. You can kind of see them in this view still. That were used when they were lifting the ship onto and off of the suborbital stand for its own engine testing. The crane lift points up there are still installed on the nose cone of the ship, and we would expect those to be removed prior to flight. And so that gave us another indication that even if they were going for full stack last night, that it wouldn't be the last full stack, because they'd have to remove those points. So a couple of pieces of evidence that it wasn't going to be the last full stack last night anyway. But it is curious. Any thoughts, and Chris, I'll open this up to you. Any thoughts as to what the point of the full stack last night was, or do you think that this is just a minor tweak after something they didn't like on the full stack or something, and the vehicles are more or less going to remain stacked after this rather than they're destacking the vehicles?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, sort of based on the behavior, it would seem, at least to me, to indicate that this wasn't the plan. That the plan was maybe to leave them stacked a bit longer. I mean, we had heard about static fires, as you were saying, and them wanting to do that. And we know they have a pretty aggressive test schedule. So to see a destack like this the very next day, I don't know. To me, it appears that this wasn't initially part of the plan, and that something was seen yesterday that they didn't like. Otherwise, I don't really know why they would have lifted it to stack it for one day just to bring it back down again. Especially given the schedule that, especially given the sort of increased schedule that they had, or not rush schedule, but the determined schedule they had to move toward first orbital flight here.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, we've got some more questions coming in, and we're basically going to have to keep an eye on what they're going to do with Ship 24. They've lifted it off the booster, and the question is, are they going to try to pull away from some of the cables that we can see attached to the QD arm, or is this just a quick change, a quick fix of some kind, and they'll be able to set the ship right back down onto the booster? But we'll have some more questions, and I'm going to toss this to y'all. And our first question here says, why does the QD need to be quick? Of course, QD stands for quick disconnect. Why does it need to be quick? Why not, a couple of minutes before launch or something like that? Chris, why do disconnects have to be quick?
Yes, because so these are sort of the quick pullaways. So if you think more of the booster down at the bottom, right, like that is going to be fueling. They're going to be replenishing these things right up until they're about ready to lift off, and then these arms have to pull away very, very, very quickly. And that's why they're called quick disconnects, because they basically remain connected to the vehicle more or less right up until the very end moment of the countdown. Because if you have a scrub or if you have an abort, a lot of times you want to leave those fueling lines connected to the vehicle. Now, SpaceX has a little bit more wiggle room here because they've automated these quick disconnects to an extent. So it will be interesting to see. But in general, quick disconnects are just called quick disconnects because they have to pull away very, very quickly at the end, because it's more efficient to just leave fueling lines connected in case of a last second abort.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it feels
Right.
like until those tanks are fully topped off, it's a way to make sure that you have extra fuel on board and enough for flight. You always want to have a little bit of backup, especially if you're dealing with a landing.
Right, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Not only just keeping the vehicle fully fueled, but like Chris said, in that abort scenario where last second your liftoff gets aborted, you don't want your disconnect to already be disconnected, and now you're gonna have problems, detanking the vehicle so that you can remedy the abort and things like that. All right, let's see. Question: Are they still refining the stacking and destacking processes and their tower? This could also be part of that. I wonder if, would it be possible that literally the whole point of the stack last night and then destacking, or at least lifting the ship again now, was just a result of they're trying to practice and refine the chopstick system rather than anything to do with the vehicles themselves at this point?
I mean, I feel like that would make a lot of sense. It's one of those things, again, the best way to test it is to just lift it up and down. And at this point, we haven't seen that many full stacks. And even so, the original first stack, I mean, you had the ship lifted on board by crane rather than the chopstick system. So it is a great way to test it. It's a little strange how quick they'd be doing it, but it's also a way to, test the connections and then test your procedures.
All
Yeah, I
right.
mean, I wouldn't necessarily put it past them. Just yesterday had more of a feel of like there was something bigger to it. And like sort of like we were talking about, there's a lot of data to potentially be gained by putting the ship on top of the booster for the multi-engine static fire campaign to test your tile bonds for your thermal protection system. So again, either one is possible. It just has the more of the feel to me that they saw something that wasn't quite right or what they expected. So instead of just blindly pressing forward as you do with a program like this, you pause for a moment to make sure you understand it.
Right, sure. Yeah, and a couple of people joining the stream a little bit, joining the stream right now and catching up. We don't actually know what the reason for the lift is because it just kind of happened. A couple of things to point out is that the ship is still actually connected to the QD arm. The full quick disconnect is not actually connected, but there's a couple cables on that arm, and on the right hand side view, well, on this view, it's the arm at the bottom of your screen. Um, and that looks like it kind of reaches out to the gap between the two vehicles. That is the ship QD or the ship quick disconnect arm, and that's how the ship is fueled during a full stack. And there's a couple cables that you can see in that view, just barely, are connected to the ship from the arm, which gives us reason to believe that they might not necessarily be bringing the ship the rest of the way down. They're just lifting it off the booster for some reason. It's also possible, though, like Chris mentioned, that they can pull the ship away, and those quick disconnects or those cables are just pull away cables, and they don't actually need to be disconnected before you move the vehicle. But anyway, keeping an eye on the ship as it has been lifted off the booster for an unknown reason. There we go. Thank you, Michael, for the Michael
Yes.
art there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we don't know exactly why. This could be working some sort of troubleshooting issues. It could also be they completed some sort of fit check and they're done, and they don't actually need to continue with the full stack, and they want to separate the vehicles for additional testing. Maybe let the booster do some testing on its own. It's also possible that they stacked nominally last night, and now they have disconnected the two vehicles, and now they're going to connect them again for some sort of refinement of the stacking process or something like that. There's a lot of different options that could explain what's going on, and we don't know exactly what is going on. So we're going to watch and find out with the rest of you. Keeping some questions coming here. Thank you to everyone who sends their support, and Bernie became a Capcom member, or upgraded to the Capcom membership. So Bernie, thank you so much for that support. A question here about the fueling process. What will the fueling process be for a full stack? Would we expect another T-minus 20-minute event or a 40-minute event or something? Any idea what the fueling process will look like?
Well, I think some of the static fires have given us a clue, right? This is more a case of where I really wish Adrian was here with the spreadsheet and everything. But I that's a lot of what we've been trying to do with the static fire campaigns for the ship and for the booster here. Adrian has really been watching to try and note when when are the vents, where are they from, and different things like that. But to be totally honest for what the answer is, uh, until they actually fully fuel one of these, don't know.
I'm gonna ask Adrian. I think Adrian is actually online. I'm gonna ask him if he has any input to that, and we'll relay that. But I mean, I agree with you, Chris. I would love to know, but we might not find out until the first time they actually do it.
Yeah, exactly.
We do have another question here asking. This is just a Starship engine test, right? Making a small flame trench. This would be an interesting configuration for a Starship engine test. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're not doing that.
No, I'm also gonna really double down on that limb and
Hmm.
say the fueling line is not connected, so
Right, yeah.
definitely not an engine test.
Well, yeah, this
that's a
ties
good
in.
idea.
This ties in with actually the next question. Have any cryogenics even flowed through the ship QD arm yet? I don't believe the answer is yes.
I've not heard of it happening since it's been out on the fully assembled tower.
Right, Chris.
I
Correct me if I'm wrong. No flow through the ship QD yet,
I
right?
want to say that's right. I want to say the only cryogenics have been through the OLM at this point.
Gotcha. And that's when they've been fueling the booster, which they do through the orbital launch mount.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, there was actually the plan was you could fuel the ship through the booster, so you didn't need a ship QD arm, and they
I'm honestly still
loaded.
wondering if that's an evolution that's coming at some point.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, it's also maybe just as simple to just have a ship QD. Not sure.
And Alex is saying in the back channels that they did a cryo test on ship 20 and booster 4 when those were stacked. However, this is a different QD.
Right.
So definitely none through this one.
Right.
That
so
we
to
can
this
answer.
ones. All right, let's see. What else do we have? What other questions? We got Stan Lawrence with just a bit of a super chat support. So Stan, thank you so much for that support. Much appreciated. All right, here's a question. JT says, "How does the attachment mechanism of the ship and booster work?" Oh, I hit the wrong button because chat jumped when I clicked the button. The system has to be fully reusable when detaching, so you can't. Yeah, we kind of alluded to this yesterday. You can't really use pyrotechnics or anything because those aren't exactly reusable. So, Sawyer, want to talk a little bit about how we expect staging to work, and it's actually pretty similar to the Falcons, I think.
I've got landscapers out here. If one of you could take it for a quick second, so I don't get
Okay.
the background noise.
Chris, want to talk about staging?
Yes, totally can. So actually, you can kind of see it here. So if you look, so the big Raptor vacuum nozzle engine that we can see there, if you look to the left of it, about the 7 o'clock position on the booster, if 6 o'clock is dead center there, you can kind of see a little protrusion that sticks up from the booster. And if you look directly above it on the ship, you can see a little slot, a corresponding slot above it. There are 3 of those around the booster and 3 corresponding on the right there and 3 corresponding on the ship itself. And that is where they connect together. To our knowledge, there are no data lines or anything that connect the two like that. It is simply those little stabilizing pins, with the idea being that the booster thrusting the vehicle up through the atmosphere is what actually keeps them physically together, and the pins keep them from moving laterally in relation to one another as they go uphill. And then basically the way they separate under the current plan, we'll see how well this works on orbital flight. That's a huge part of the test too, is validating these computer models that say this will work. And you can see one of the other ones being highlighted there too by Michael. But the way basically that they will separate is that the shutdown sequence, because the engines are started on the booster in a staggered start sequence, they are also shut down in that same sequence for acoustic and vibrational considerations. And the way they will perform that shutdown will actually impart a little bit of the backflip rotation to the booster for it to start turning around for the burn back to the launch site. And that inertia will just separate them, much like the Starlink satellites separate from the top of the first stage, of the second stage of the Falcon 9, and then Starship will very quickly ignite its six Raptor engines, and continue the journey onward to orbit as the booster then relights some of its 33 engines to head back to the launch site for the catch attempt.
Talking while muted. Thank you so much, Chris, for that answer. I promise I said thank you right away.
I was like, oh no, I've been talking in my head all this time.
No. But thank you for that. And yeah, it's really actually a pretty interesting design for the staging mechanism. So thanks for going into that. Other questions here. Michael says, is the mover down below still there to set Starship on? So the transport stand that it came on, is that still there? Can we see that in any of these views? Is it the stand? I gotta remember where exactly. From this perspective, it's kind of behind the tower, I think.
Yeah, it would be behind it in this view.
I think so. I mean, I think you can kind of see. Yeah, exactly, right there, where Michael just.
Oh,
Michael
those things stand up. I see
That's
it.
it.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, that's still there. Thank you, Michael. That's a There you go. Thank you, Michael. Michael's really getting the hang of the on-screen drawing here. I appreciate that.
I also appreciate he puts the slash through the 7 like I do.
Me too.
Yeah.
The proper way to write a 7. Yes.
Thank
you.
Yes.
Okay. See, I don't do that, so. But yeah, so the transport stand is still there. So in theory, if they are really putting the ship all the way down, they can do that. But again, I think I'm leaning towards they're just lifting it off the booster and then putting it back. Let me see what other questions we've got. Oh, here we go. Roy asks, if Booster 7 is successfully captured on the first launch, do you think they'll reuse any of the engines since they probably won't reuse the booster?
I'm not
Do you think...
sure.
Oh! Yeah, go ahead, Sawyer, yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, for the first flight, SpaceX does love kind of keeping them. You've got, the first Falcon 9 that landed at Hawthorne. You've got the first one that landed on the barge out at Kennedy now. I could see them maybe keeping it. Plus, the way they keep evolving all these Raptors over time, they might become obsolete pretty quickly after. Who knows?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there on that, because yeah, it's the obsolescence as the design improves, and I think there are already like minor improvements to 8. Like 7 and 8 are basically identical, but there are slight improvements to 8 from what they learned building 7. But yeah, beyond that, it kind of depends, I think it would ultimately come down to how successful the actual orbital thing is. Like I could potentially see a scenario where if the booster part of it worked and they catch this, which is still the part that I think holds the most risk, rather than lighting 33 engines all at once, more or less all at once. Yeah, Alex in our back channel confirming that B8 has a few minor upgrades over 7, but Booster 9 has major upgrades at this point. And if Booster 9 has major upgrades, they will likely just move to Booster 9. But I could potentially see a scenario if 7 is successful, but Ship 24 for some reason encounters issues and doesn't complete the full flight envelope, that maybe reflying 7 gets you something before you move to the next iterative upgrade of 9.
Yeah, okay.
In the scenario that Ship 24 has the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, still, though, definitely leaning towards it's simply going to be a one-flight vehicle, even if it's, recovered.
Yeah, and the main reason for this is like the significant upgrades on Booster 9, it will still basically look the same. We're sort of at the point where the outer mold line of these things is going to start looking the same as the iterations keep going. But like Booster 9, the hydraulic power units are going away. The Raptors are getting their electric thrust vector control systems. There are new shields that are sort of going on. So, yeah, there is a huge iterative step to Booster 9.
Gotcha. Again, a lot of people in chat, especially if you're just joining us, this is a bit of an out-of-nowhere stream and coverage of a unexpected lift here. Here's what we know. neither the ship or the booster are moving. So this isn't a, like, it doesn't look like they're destacking the whole way, because otherwise wouldn't the ship be rotating out of the way and moving towards the ground? Also, it's still kind of connected to the QD arm with some smaller cables that could just be pull-away cables, could also not be. But they're also not setting the ship back down. They've just lifted it and sat it there. Which offers more questions than answers. Basically, I want to acknowledge that nothing is happening. I don't know what they're going to do next. If they were trying to adjust like an alignment or something like that, surely either the booster or the ship would be moving. I don't know what their ability to move the booster is. When we saw stacking yesterday, when they like set the ship down, Chris, the booster shifted a bit like as the ship came in contact with it, and I wonder if that's either a result of the OLM can like adjust the booster's position slightly, or whether it's a just, I don't know, something that the ship can. It just as the ship sat on the booster, it shifted a bit, but that was nominal. I really don't know. But we did see that booster movement when they were stacking yesterday, and I do, I wonder what's going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, like, to that, I wonder if maybe, I mean, spitballing possibilities here. I wonder if maybe they needed to pick the ship up in order, maybe not to move the booster, but do something with the OLM. Because you're right, like, we did see the shift in the booster when they set it down yesterday, and maybe that has something to do with the pickup here today, but also possible they have to pick it up in order to do something with the OLM at this point.
All right. Bringing some other questions here. We got one asking, could this be a stage separation test? Does that make any sense to you two?
No, because the way they're going to separate is not linearly, where they just pull apart in a straight line like retro thrusters are firing on the booster, like how Falcon 9 separates, right, with the spring load, how Atlas separates with its separation motors. This is more of a rotational separation to sort of kick the ship off to the side as the booster starts to reorient itself as the engine shut down. So simply lifting it straight up would not mimic what the booster and ship will be doing when they actually separate in the upper reaches of the atmosphere during flight.
Yeah, this one's heavily reliant upon physics, and you're not going to be able to get those exact forces of physics from just the chopsticks.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Chat mentioning that SpaceX has simply hit the confuse media button. We should know better by now. Yeah, you're right. Let's see. Here's some contribution to our previous discussion about fueling the ship. Jesse Bear says you can't fuel the booster because the pressure needed to pump the fuel increases exponentially with height. Reinforcing the fuel lines to handle the increased pressure adds weight. That's an interesting point. I didn't think about that particular part of it. I simply thought, well, if you don't have fuel lines that go from the bottom of the booster all the way up to the ship, that reduces the weight. But I guess it would also simply make sense that not only that, but the systems required to pump the fuel all the way up into the ship via the booster would be more. Now, but here's the caveat: you still have to pump the fuel up the launch tower and into the QD arm. So, yes, you won't have those lines on the booster, so you save weight there. But like the ground pump systems are probably just going to be about the same.
It might honestly come down to what's easier, like
sure.
what's simpler on the ground for this, and if the QD works, I mean, if the ARM QD works, and it is simple, and they're not finding that they're having to repair it a lot because of how they swing it out of the way, that could definitely be part of it too, because SpaceX is going to go with what's the simplest and easiest to design for turnaround.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And at the same time, we've seen it work great for the OLM for the booster part, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of way too.
Sure. Alright, what else we got? Wasted says the tip of Ship 24 is almost as high as Starhopper hopped on its highest hop. First of all, lots of hops in that sentence. Just want to point that out. But also, yeah. So hold on. If the whole vehicle, what the booster's 70 meters and the ship's 50 meters tall, right?
I think the booster is 69 now.
Oh yeah,
Of course
because
it
that
is.
was the thing at one point.
Yes. Yes.
Well, so all right. So let's roughly round it to
But
120 plus what's the launch mount? Is that another 30 meters? Are we thinking like it's about 150? I guess.
probably about 150. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
close to it.
kind of crazy. You know how the first flight by the Wright flyers was like shorter than the length of a airliner?
Yeah,
It's that
it was
it
less
feels
than
like
the
another one of those facts.
Yeah, that was less than the distance of a 747 wingspan.
Right. And now we've got the full stack sitting on the pad is the same height as the first like Starhopper's prototype of maximum altitude. Oh
That's
man.
not mind-blowing of progress, nothing is.
Right. Let's see, another question here. Here's a good one, and I like to take this one. Samuel's saying, why don't they only use the vacuum engines after SEP? Wouldn't that be more efficient? It actually wouldn't, and here's why. First of all, the primary reason for them probably having the sea level engines as well, not just for landing eventually, but also they are the engines that provide gimbal authority. So in order to steer the vehicle, you're going to want those in addition to the non-gimbling vacuum engines, because differential throttle is a thing. You also have reaction thrusters, but it is much more effective to steer with engine gimbal, and it's probably more reliable that way. However, you also need additional thrust. So even if you could just replace the 3 sea level Raptors with like a single vacuum engine, that's still a decrease in thrust, and you're going to suffer from gravity losses if you do that. The higher thrust you have on your upper stage, the less time you spend reaching orbit, and thus the less time gravity is pulling you down during that portion of the flight, and you actually need less energy if you can reach orbit faster. That's why high thrust also equates to efficiency. It's not just about... well, the same thing comes into mind when you're doing propulsively landed vehicles, right? I mean, if you had a really low thrust vehicle that was going to propulsively land, you would spend more time in those landing burns and you would need more fuel. So having a higher thrust engine increases your overall efficiency because you simply need to fire the engine for less time. So all things considered, using only vacuum engines would actually be less efficient than the current plan. It is also worth reiterating that sea level engines get more efficient in vacuum, even if they are not quite as efficient as a vacuum optimized engine. The sea level engine efficiency does still increase when you get into space.
Okay, the visual of the boom lift just emerging from the booster there at first was like the booster was growing an arm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was good. Like.
So yeah, that was maybe a hint as to what's going on. On your right-hand side view, looks like a person lift is moving up the side of the booster there. Oh man, what are they gonna look at?
Oh wow!
Is what we saw on the ship the tagline that they grab?
I don't know. I think
I don't know why
attached
they
to,
would
like...
be going. I don't know why they would be going up to grab that. That seems unsafe. Anyway, ignore me.
Yeah.
That was just a.
Well, also that, but I'm also thinking, like, if that was it, I'm pretty sure they can access the QD arm by simply going up the elevator. Like, why would they be in that lift, you know? I bet they're going to look at something that you can't access from the QD arm.
Yeah.
Unless there's a safety reason that
yes.
they can't have them on the tower while it's not fully stacked.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going. Yeah.
This is all very interesting. But here, we're getting our first hint as to what might be going on as they got personnel moving up towards the top of the booster here. Huh. Well, if they do go and disconnect those cables, that's probably a word in favor of destack, a full destack. But we'll see.
Are they not on the wrong side for that?
No, I think they're right, because on that right-hand side view, I think they can reach the side of the booster where the QD interface is.
It looks like they're on that on the side of the QD.
Oh, and more people
they also
are getting
got
on, and more
yeah,
people are
another
getting into
lift.
the other one. Yeah.
This is all very interesting. I will keep questions coming while we wait to see what exactly they're doing. But this is also probably why, I mean, they also held the ship right where it is. You know, they're not going to move the chopstick arms when there's personnel around. They're going to move the ship to a stable position and then get the lifts up to do whatever work they need to do. So that makes a lot of sense. And of course, this could also pertain to a quick adjustment rather than a full disconnect. So we'll see.
I could jump in a quick second here. One thing I found interesting during the stack last night was the fact that once they swung 24 around, they moved that QD arm into place almost as if it was kind of, in a way, used for inspection or cameras or something of the connection between the two. And it's interesting that it is still extended in that kind of view. So I don't know if that's another way that they can look at things in addition to the crews now on their way up. It's interesting the way that's all still positioned.
All right. Well, questions until we see more, I guess. Carl asks, will the booster need a re-entry burn?
The burn profile that I have seen, or rather that SpaceX last updated us on, is that there is a boost back burn to obviously reorient the trajectory back to the landing site, and then the landing burn itself, that there is no entry burn for the booster.
Right. And I think that just goes into, that's going to be some lessons that they learned from the Falcon program, right? They learned what kind of energies and heating they can expect on that profile, and they were able to build the booster to not require a re-entry burn, but rather just passively survive that environment. And that saves you some propellant.
Exactly. And even just the upgrades that they made to Falcon along the line, including the titanium grid fins to help with atmospheric steering too. So, I mean, there's major improvements I'm sure that can be transferred into the Starship program.
There you go.
So I know we equally are impressed with cranes. I mean, I love that we have cranes that can just go halfway up this beast.
Right, yeah, true.
I mean, more than halfway up since the booster's bigger, but like...
Yeah, I mean, this is like 100 meters off the ground, and no big deal. Let's see. Another question from Bill saying, thought Booster 7 was splashing into the Gulf and not being caught on the first flight. I think it depends on how the flight starts to go, right?
Thought B7 was splashing into the Gulf. So you are correct, Bill. The original flight plan that got filed with the U.S. federal government basically said that the booster and the ship were originally going to be expended on the first orbital flight, that they were going to bring the booster back about 20 kilometers offshore from Starbase, and they were going to basically have it do the landing, but there was not a tower there to catch it. And then they were going to do a very similar thing with the ship, where ship would initially be left suborbital, orbital velocity, but a suborbital trajectory, just like the SLS core stage is left after its launch. And this would permit the ship to come down over Hawaii passively, and it would likewise do a full reentry profile and pretend to land, but there would just be nothing there to catch it. That has altered. That then altered to no, it's going to be an orbital flight and it's going to deploy Starlink version 2s. And we now know that at least on the first flight, per the current plan, there is no desire to put the Starlink version 2s on it. So exactly what the flight profile is, I think at this point, kind of up in the air, but I think they would still lean toward full orbital if they can get regulatory approval for that.
There you go.
I think I covered that, right, Thomas?
Yes, I think you got it. Thank you, guys.
Sounds good to me.
Let's see. Stan says, bacon is banned on Starship after an overexcited man was found with a long barbecue fork near the orbital launch mount.
Well, Jack did land yesterday.
Jack is in Boca, so no, I don't think so, but thanks for the support.
Beware the beard and bacon.
We got there's
bacon.
Take a look inside the QD arm. There is personnel accessing the QD arm right now.
Oh, wow.
It's hard to see.
Definitely is.
The drone is also off to the right.
Oh, yep, and a
of
drone
this
ops there as
process,
well.
keeping an eye on everything.
The plot thickens. Okay.
Then the more we're seeing more and more people on this arm, more and more people doing stuff. I mean, I am wondering if the people might be there as spotters on the lifts. Also potentially possible this is a reseat of
Right.
Starship, like that they did see something, so they're just trying to do visual. As Doss says, Mark One eyeball. But they could also be disconnecting the cables and getting ready to actually perform the swing over for AD stack. So from the visuals, still waiting to see, but this basically gives them access to all three of the connection points, because we saw the one lift went up. We saw people getting on the other lift, which would presumably go to the one on the right, on the left hand side of the screen, and then the quick disconnect arm would give them access to the other one, the third one that's there. So it is possible this is a visual thing where they wanted, as Doss is fond of saying, the old Mark One eyeball on the situation in addition to the cameras. Also, could be disconnection, like of the arm, from Starship, but just throwing out the possibilities of what it is that we are seeing here.
Are there people currently on the QD arm?
Yes.
Okay.
And I do know we were pointing out yesterday that there are basically three pins or three connections between each of the vehicles. And so if we have two lifts and then people on the QD arm, possible that they can access all three of those points and aid in whatever troubleshooting they're doing right now.
Definitely possible.
A question here from David asking, where is the SpaceX command building at Starbase? Is it the Stargate facility? By the production site?
I believe that's where the original one is, yes.
All right. Another question. Does the QD arm add any stability to Starship when on the orbital launch mount? Once upon a time, there were arms on the QD arm specifically for that purpose, right?
Yeah, there were. In fact, when they did the full... Okay, let me try that again. Two words that start with F right next to each other. When they did the first full stack, there we go, back in February, and then they did the other one in March. Yeah, there were little arms that came out and grabbed the booster to help stabilize it before ship came down on top.
Yeah, I gotcha. But I think one of the most common questions we got last night was, are they going to re-add those arms? And we frankly don't know. But
I think
right now,
last night the answer was leaning toward no, and maybe the answer is more like, I guess it depends on what they saw yesterday and why these people are here.
Right.
Sure.
It is not, though, disconnected from the chopsticks yet, since it's been on last night, I believe.
Right. Let's see what else. We did do a poll in chat. I've been told to announce the results. 68% of you think that they're just reseating the ship onto the booster, and 31% said destack to the transport stand. Does that math work? Well, that's only 99%. YouTube, what are you doing with your rounding? All right, I'm calling it 69%, reseating on booster 7.
It's probably like that annoying thing, right? Like 68.9 and 31.1.
But they rounded both down for some reason, yeah.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, a bunch of you think they're just reseating it. I think I would hope so, because that would probably mean less of an issue than, oh, we have to destack the whole vehicle for some reason. But anyway, yeah, you can see personnel working in that lift. So that left-hand side view, you can see both the people in the lift and people on the QD arm working on some sort of issue. All right, what other questions we got here? Will P says, what's the best part of a brownie, the edge or the middle?
Oh, the edge.
Oh, no,
wait,
middle
really?
all the way.
Best of both worlds.
Wait, Chris, you actually think the edge is better than the middle of the brownie?
Yeah, because when you get an edge piece, you get a little bit of the crispiness of the edge and the gooiness of the middle. Best of both worlds.
No, but I think I'm with Sawyer on this one.
Crunchy bits are sometimes too crunchy. You just get burnt flavor. You want that soft brownie flavor, so you go for the middle.
Well, that sounds like a baking issue.
No. All right, everyone relax. Oh man, now I just want brownies.
We
Anyway.
we need the
Thanks.
judges from Great British Bake Off to weigh in on
Yeah,
this. That's what we
right.
need.
Oh
Right,
no,
yeah.
I don't
It
want
was
to. I don't know what Noel's gonna say.
Yeah.
my fault for asking the question. Anyway, Caesar with a bit of super chat support as well. Appreciate that. Ron Smith gifted 5 red team memberships as well. Thank you so much.
We can also
That
see
lift going
lift
down?
number 1 coming down rapidly.
That was quick.
Yeah, and it seems like lift 3 didn't actually go up yet, did it?
But I was gonna say we never saw that other lift go up.
Maybe it's the same crane driver.
Oh yeah, they got to lower one so they can raise the other. Oh god, we'll be here all day. Still people on the QD arm? I think so. I think I see.
Looks like it.
Let me see. Drone's still flying around. Oh yeah, you can definitely see still people in this view. Did they do anything? I still see that cable connected. They didn't disconnect that.
This is fascinating and yet confusing at the exact same time.
Indeed. Admiral Merith says they have a brownie pan that makes 100% edge pieces. How does that even work?
I need
Like
a
a
brownie pan that
ring?
makes 0 edge
Is it- yeah.
pieces.
It's just an infinite brownie pan.
There you
There are
go.
no edges.
I mean, that's actually what I was thinking, Thomas. I mean, it would have to almost be in the shape of the infinity symbol, wouldn't it? Like,
Just have one that encircles the entire Earth. There is no edge, only top and bottom.
make a brownie.
Man. Let me see. What other questions we got? All right, here's a question I'll open up to. Do you guys think that SpaceX will do another static before they do the 33 engines, or will the next one have 33 Raptors? Go for it.
I think in all honesty, it'll be. I think if I was a betting person, I would say we'll see a staged approach to this, where we might see the outer ring and then the inner cluster go separately before they go all the way to 33. Although, I mean, there is like a part of me that's like, yeah, just come on, do 33. But this program is way too valuable to go straight to 33 if there's an incremental reason to do outer ring, inner cluster, and then fire them all to gain your data that way.
I agree 100% on that. You're not going to risk your whole vehicle right away when you can test each ring. I mean, we've gone 6 to 7, so it'd be strange, I think, to go from 7 right to 33. I could see maybe a 14 or a 16 and then kind of expanding further, eventually till you get to 33. It may be quick in between each of these static fires, though. So I'm not saying you're talking a month in between, but my thought is incremental.
All right, there you go. People are pointing out that they did not disconnect those cables on the QD arm.
Nope.
So that's not why they've sent people up there. Well, there are still people on the QD arm though, so I guess we'll keep an eye on it. But doesn't look like they did anything with that. And whatever that other lift went up for was pretty quick because they're already on the way down.
And you can see the people are on like the top part of the arm that sort of extends outward all the way to the ship. So there's the big clustered part that you can barely see through. Then there's a little open square with one diagonal line through it, and the people are right above, are basically standing on that square right now.
I don't know if we need Michael Art or not for that.
All right. Let's see. James Jury's with a super chat saying the corners are the best part. No, I want as little edge as possible.
See? Yes! New
Thomas,
poll.
you and I are
No.
going to have to... You know what? Here's the best part, though. When all three of us are at a launch, we can share, because then Chris can eat the outsides and you and I can have the middle.
I suppose. Although there's always
Works for
more
me,
edge
more
than
edge
middle.
pieces.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say there's
yeah.
way more. That's not fair.
The boss has spoken. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
man. Oh no. Alright, what else we got? Any more updates on future road closures? I'm gonna go to my favorite website, whenhop.com. And it says the only closure currently scheduled is still today's, which lasts until 8 p.m. Central Time. So no future road closures yet, although I'm sure we'll bring that up as soon as we have them. Anyway, what else we got? Oh,
Honestly,
okay.
Also, in this view, it's very interesting that you can see them. They're no longer at the actual booster part. It looks like they're working more with the lines on the actual QD portion.
Right, okay. Another thing I want to point out here, look on this view, you can see it. There's something that appears to be like sticking up out of the booster on the right-hand side. That's not a person, right? That's one of the pins or something.
I would hope it looks like a pin.
But like, it does. I would imagine it's actually not safe to have a person in there right now. I believe what you're seeing there. It's the reason is Chad is asking. I'm pretty sure that's just one of the 3 pins on the booster that connect into the ship.
A little part on the right.
Yeah, on top of the booster on the right side.
Yep. Yeah, that's just one of the pins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to clarify, there's no people sitting on top of the booster, which I don't think would be a very smart thing. Let's see.
Yeah, there's a better angle. You can see it's definitely the pin.
Yeah. Good to clarify that. Got some people walking away from the ship on that QD arm. Still some cables attached. Still a couple people there, though. Alright. Question from Matt. What would the implications be of lightning striking the tower there at Starbase? They don't have the 4 towers. Aren't there plans? I don't know if it's there yet, but don't they, in theory, have a lightning rod going on top of the tower at some point?
In theory, yes, and you can see some of the scaffolding that we originally thought was for the construction and design of it too. But yeah, there were plans that did show it having a lightning mast.
I wonder if they just haven't seen any weather that prompted them to actually install the thing. Like it's just sitting somewhere like, well, we haven't really needed it yet, so we're not bothering.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that. There could be some other like lightning arresters that are in work here to provide some, not all, but some protection. There could be things that and here's the other thing, like what's in the middle of that scaffolding on the tower could actually be it too. The lightning masts don't have to be those big white masts, because those white masts do not attract lightning strikes. It's the catenary wires that are then strung around the top of them and then down to the ground that attract the strike. But at Vandenberg, they do use some lightning protection rods that are attached to towers, and those rods actually attract the strike, and then the strike is channeled down the structure of the tower, therefore negating the need for the catenary wires. So if I'm a betting person, because of how big this system is, they're not going for wires, they're going for strike a rod and channel it down the tower. Which is
there was
exactly
a video, though, that explained those towers somewhere.
I know, right? I mean, if you're interested in how lightning protection systems work, just saying, we've got that. With the experts, too. So yeah, there are different ways that they can do lightning protection systems to protect the rockets and to protect the fuel and everything to attract the strike to a safe location. And a rod would be a way to do it, and then just channel it all down the tower.
I gotcha. Still a few people there on the QD arm, so even though that one lift went down, there's still personnel on the actual ship QD arm, potentially looking at whatever issue they are working right now. Got some super chats coming in. Jordan with some super chat support, appreciate that. James Dury's chanting "Edge, Edge, Edge." We've prompted a brownie debate in the chat now.
Oh, okay. I was trying to make that something about Starship, and I was like, what? Like,
No,
I wasn't
no.
getting it. Edge of brownies. Okay, yes, I get it now. Yes.
Soft.
And then 1979 saying, "How about the whole brownie? Get your own." Fair.
Whole brownie, get your own. I mean, also fair. Yes.
Oh man. Let's see. David Edwards asking, can people walk on the chopsticks? I think there's no scaffolding up there. I think they can at least currently access well,
I don't know if they would let them up there, like in its current configuration, but in general, yes, the railings are there because when they are lowered, you do have access to do repairs and do maintenance and everything like that, but they're still pretty high up off the ground. So OSHA, safety, environment regulations in the United States, you have to have stuff like that. Yeah. But in terms of would they let them up there in their current configuration bearing the load of a ship, I can't answer that, but I would almost hedge toward no right now.
Sure.
Same. And also, you would think that maybe they would actually lower them if you were going to do any work on it, so you don't have that risk of all that extra height.
Exactly, and the higher up the tower you go with the arms, the increased wind speed you could potentially have there as well. As wind speed does change as you ascend in elevation, especially with a tower this tall.
Yep, sure. Um, Jaded Hobo says that Booster 8 is the lightning rod. Ah, yes, of course.
Oh, poor.
It's been sitting out there doing nothing else, so might as well be.
And just confirming, basically, since we've gone live for the most part, we have not seen any movement really of Booster 7 or Ship 24.
Yeah.
That's correct, and that's maybe a good point to sort of do a bit of a recap here. As to where we stand, we did see them. Obviously, they lifted Ship 24 off of Booster 7 here, but as noted, they didn't disconnect everything from the quick disconnect arm. That's the arm toward the bottom of the screen right now, swinging out toward the base of ship, which is being held by the catch arms and stacking arms there. But as to exactly what they are doing is the question. Definitely, they picked it up. They sent some people up the tower onto the quick disconnect arm, and they also sent some people up in a boom lift or crane lift, whatever we're calling it there. And are they destacking it? Well, they definitely destacked it because they picked it up. But are they going to move Ship 24 down to the ground, or is this a, hey, we saw something that didn't look quite right on the full stack mate yesterday, so we wanted to lift it back up, send people up there to investigate, get some more data, and then develop a forward plan, either reseat, lower it back down onto the top of ship, or onto the top of the booster, or move the ship onto its stand.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. The old confuse media button still hard at work at SpaceX, as we can see. What else we got? Someone in chat said the QD arm, part of the QD moved. Sure you're not seeing the people walking on the arm? I don't see any. Well, keep an eye on it. I don't see anything of the QD actually moving, unless I missed something. Michael said they moved one of the catwalks. I see.
Okay.
So yeah, that must be just trying to access whatever they're trying to get at. Are there still people on the arm? Yeah, I still see people walking around. They haven't left it. Like, if all the people left the arm, I would guess that they're about to either put the ship back down or something.
They're in like the central, well, as you say that, they all move toward the central part of the tower off the arm. So we'll see if they come back. But yeah, the people were in like the meaty central part of the arm off toward the tower. But they all then walked off toward the tower right there. And you can actually see them on the tower now, on the tower level themselves there. So yeah, we'll see what they are about to do. But it was interesting that they picked it up, kept it in a stable configuration for a while, and then people started to ascend up the tower and up to it. So that might have been part of it, of just giving it a moment to make sure it was perfectly stable for these types of up close inspections while the arms are bearing all of the weight like this in a raised position.
Also don't know how long it takes to just get up there. I mean, who knows where they had to hold before, while they were initially lifting the ship. They could have been sitting like outside the pad perimeter, and then you gotta drive onto the pad, you gotta get in the elevator. It's a long elevator. Like, there's a couple, it takes a minute. But yeah, absolutely. Okay. Lars asking, yesterday the covers on the ship QD lines were mentioned. Are they removing those by any chance? Love the streams. Appreciate the kind words there, Lars. Covers on the ship QD lines. Like, see, there's another chance where I don't know exactly what you're referring to. Either of you know?
I'm not 100% sure myself.
Oh, yes. I do know where this is, but I don't know if we have the same camera positioning angles today. There on the edge of the quick disconnect where it would actually come across and mate to the ship, there were covers over the fuel and data and electrical lines and everything, just protecting it.
Oh, so like
Whether
they would need to be removed if you were actually going to connect the umbilical.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
I don't know,
All
maybe
right,
something
well,
to similar to protection on maybe the thrusters on the shuttle, like when it's at the launch pad.
right, yeah.
Sorry, I had to mention shuttle. Word with Chris here.
Yeah, no, we check that off the bingo card. We're good to go. Yeah, Michael, I know you're working on the camera views. If we have a view of the ship QD where we could see if they still have covers on, that's a good point to ask. I don't think it would explain the other lifts going up. That
No, it would
so my
not.
guess is
Yep.
that they are not doing that, but maybe we can get a check on that.
Yeah, let's just be very clear. If they did remove the lines, if they did remove the covers from the fueling lines on the quick disconnect, that would not be the reason why they had to pick the ship back up today.
Okay, gotcha.
You're
all right, there
hearing
we
the back
go.
channel, by the way, that the
Oh,
QD was connected overnight, so they had to have been removed.
Okay. All right, so I guess they removed those covers last night rather than earlier. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you for that. What else we got? So Matthew saying, how long would it take a raptor to cook a brownie? Depends on how close you are to the raptor.
yes.
You're talking what, at
Uh,
least 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit here? So
James Jury says, what about cake, Edgerman? Okay, this is different because cake is almost always covered in frosting, and you gotta have frosting. So that's a very different case.
yeah, the edge part is where you get that extra frosting layer too. So
Yeah. So I'd go edge there. Let's see. Upper Stage says, thanks to Nick and Jack for swapping out the batteries this morning and keeping things running. Thanks for the chat, contributing to their lunch logistics fund. All right, well, appreciate the support there, and I'm sure that Nick and Jack also appreciate this. Here is a good question. I'm going to open this up to both of you. How long until we see an astronaut walkway added to the tower would it look like the Dragon walkway? So, talking about a crew access arm for the more technical term, but we ever going to see one of those at the Starbase tower? And if so, maybe when?
So I think the definite current plan is that we would see one at the Starbase tower. There are a couple of Starship crewed lunar missions with Dear Moon and the one that was announced today with Dennis and Akiko Tito on board as well. While they did say that they weren't certain which location it would launch from, Starbase or the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, there are plans and there are renders that we have seen for the crew arms for Starship. So odds are that the one in Boca will get it. Will get one at one point, and it did in the renders look more or less like a bigger version of the one that's on 39A right now, which would make sense from the aesthetic perspective that SpaceX seems to be going for with the vehicles.
What do
exactly,
you think,
yeah, that
Spirit?
simple, streamlined kind of look to it all. I definitely see it happening. I don't know how many crew flights it would be at Starbase versus out of Kennedy, which it seems like is where they want to fly a lot of missions as well. But I definitely would see them putting it on here first and testing as well. How soon, though, is the question.
Right. I mean, I don't even know if they've finished their design for the crewed Starship, Like, part of me wonders if that will take a while, and until they know exactly where they want to put the crew hatch, that'll obviously determine parts of the design for the crew access arm. But I would also agree that it's going to look like something like the Dragon one. It's part of SpaceX's aesthetic. Let's see. A question from Tim asking if Ship 24 will launch with any cargo on board. I think they welded the payload doors shut, right?
Correct. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So, I mean, be pretty difficult to deploy any cargo. I suppose they could cut open the nose cone, put some cargo in, and then weld it again, and then not deploy it if they needed some sort of mass simulator or something.
Yeah,
My
but
guess is that
with no Pez dispenser and no payload bay doors
Yeah.
that open or close, I don't see any payload they would be able to add.
Yeah, I don't think that we're gonna expect any cargo on board the first Starship flight at this rate, mostly focused on getting the ship to orbit and back rather than putting any payloads on board, which is pretty typical of first flights of vehicles.
Yeah, either that or like an internal funny payload.
A wheel of
Right.
cheese per se.
Yeah, like a wheel of cheese per se. Yes, that went up on the first Dragon. Yes,
Wheel of cheese in the trunk of
And
a
a
Tesla
car.
Roadster, and
Oh
Exactly.
yeah, a car.
let's see. Plutonium says the Starship
You
looks like.
just flex and put Falcon 1 inside of it.
Oh, there you go. Oh man. Plutonium says the Starship looks like calamari being picked up by chopsticks. Well, great. Now I'm hungry for calamari. Well done.
Looks like calamari.
I mean, it's kind of like a ring shape, kind of, sort of ish. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I'll go with it.
Okay.
Justin Wayne says frosting on brownies, good or evil? I don't put frosting on brownies. A good brownie needs no frosting.
Exactly. If you're
Right.
frosting a brownie, you're covering up a ridiculously gooey middle.
Or you made it way
Or
too
an
dry. and you're
excessively
trying to fix
crunchy edge.
Oh,
Oh man, this is gonna be the new bacon. Oh,
Hey.
no.
Jack has his bacon. The Florida crew has their brownies.
apparently. Oh man. Let's see. Gareth asking, how does Starship connect to Super Heavy? We touched on this earlier, but in this, actually, can we see it in this view?
You can, yes, on the right,
Yeah.
on the left-hand side of the screen.
Just a little bit. There's basically 3 pins that stick up from the top of the booster, and they go into little slots on the bottom of the ship, kind of along the circumference, and they just fit on those 3 pins. So it's not a pyrotechnic device. It's not a pneumatic pusher or anything. It's just pins to hold the vehicles in place relative to one another, and the weight of the ship kind of just holds it on top of those pins there. Yes, also they could do a Cybertruck for the first payload. That'd be a good point. Would the edge of a brownie or the middle of a brownie make for a more effective heat shield?
I think it depends
Sure.
on where in the vehicle you're placing it.
Ooh.
And how well you want it cooked upon landing.
True.
Oh, what is happening? This is what happens when they just lift the vehicle like
but-
2 feet and then they don't do anything.
Ablative brownies or reusable brownie heat shield? I think that's the question.
Well, if
I
I'm
don't
just
think
going
I'd
to eat
ever
it
want a
anyway, no
reusable
use in
brownie.
it being reusable, right?
Yeah, I would never want a reusable brownie ever.
These
Oh,
are the big
God.
engineering questions of the day. Like,
So what are we
James
gonna call
Drury
it now?
says,
Tough brown instead of tough rock.
but to the stacking that's happening, yes.
yeah, really. Well, I just want to say that James Drury has mentioned ice cream with brownies, which is also always an amazing combination, so yes.
Ooh, a warm brownie with ice cream. Yes, that is good.
Exactly.
please.
Vanilla ice
See,
cream.
agreement, harmony. We got there.
We
Finally.
got there eventually. What are the little round holes a few meters underneath the grid fins on Booster 7 seen in the close-up view? I think they're looking at the vents? I think that's what
Round-
they're looking at.
Yes, the vents. Those are the methane tank vents. Yes.
So those are, and they actually double as RCS thrusters. They're basically using venting gases for attitude control as well, so...
Yes, why add an RCS thruster when you can simply vent the tank and have the same effect on the orientation of your booster?
Yep, exactly. Alright, here's another question from Mark. What is the most likely location for the 3rd orbital launch tower? Got one in Boca and one at 39A.
I would honestly say at this point, I would not at all be surprised to see it go to the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station side of the Florida Spaceport, because there is no part of this vehicle the DoD is not interested in. DoD meaning Department of Defense. I could really see the 3rd tower going up at Cape Canaveral. Yeah.
The question is, though, would it go up at their current pad at Slick 40, or would they take an additional pad there in addition to their current plan to add a Launch Complex 49?
I'm not actually sure the footprint of 40 is big enough, and if the whole point of adding a crew tower to 40 is to deconflict the Starship 39A conflict with crew, I would not expect to see them put the backup Starship tower at 40 with another crew tower for Falcon 9. I would almost suspect that a lease agreement might be forthcoming. I know nothing. I'm just saying, like, if you're asking the question, I think it's a really good question, Mark. I think it would be at the Cape side because of the military implications for this system.
That could make sense. And yeah, 40 does feel like a really small launch pad, especially in comparison to when you're in 39A. So I could definitely see that as sticking to just a backup option for crew flights.
You got it. Let me see. Do we think that the heat shield tiles along the leading edges are thicker than others or have different compounds? All right, shuttle people, I know you know the answer to this, so go for it.
Do you think
You
that
want
the
to
heat
start it
tiles
off, Chris?
along the leading edge are thicker? Wait, say that again?
So basically, the heat shield tiles, are they different
Yes.
based on where on the vehicle they are?
For Starship, they might be, because there were some thickness differences with what we had with the space shuttle. And it sort of comes down to what is the predicted heating environment within the particular region, what are the potential changing thermal dynamics within the region, not just from your angle of attack and orientation of the vehicle, but Starship has flaps. And those flaps are going to be moving and doing things as well during the entry to help with cross-range capability, a little to an extent as it is re-entering. And as those flaps are moving, it's changing the thermal environment around the vehicle. So some of the tiles on the flaps look and appear to be a lot thicker than some of the base heat shield tiles, which would make sense because as you start getting out toward the more leading edge, so to speak, of the vehicle's outer mold line, especially the leading edge that hits the main thermal properties of the atmosphere as you are entering in that nose-up configuration, that is where the highest heat loads will be, at the nose and the leading edge of the flaps. So having thicker thermal protection around that area 100% makes sense from just a thermal dynamics perspective of what you're trying to do to protect the vehicle.
And the other major difference from shuttle is that this is primarily the one type of tile you've got, whereas the shuttle had three different types of thermal protection on it, between the white thermal blanket, the silica tiles, and then in that nose and leading edge area, the reinforced carbon.
Yeah,
All right,
Exactly.
say shuttle words again.
Well, there's a reason I asked you two. I know you both got the shuttle knowledge. And right on cue, I've got another shuttle question for you, so don't go anywhere. Owen says, when the Super Heavy launches, will there be probably... Well, I'm going to try this sentence one more time. When Super Heavy launches, there will probably be tiles that fall off. Could those falling tiles possibly damage the booster's grid fins at high speeds, like the foam insulation on the space shuttle?
Fantastic question. No, not in this regard. Because my gosh, what would you need to damage a grid fin? Thor's hammer, just about. I see what you're saying. The main issue of what happened with Columbia, when the reinforced carbon panel on her left wing was breached with the foam hit on STS-107's ascent. The wing leading edge carbon panels became more and more brittle each time they went through a reentry. So each time they were exposed to the really searing hot 1700, 1800 degrees centigrade temperatures of reentry, they would become gradually more and more brittle. And they also would just naturally become more and more brittle with age. One of the main shocks of the Columbia accident investigation was when they took the panels off of Enterprise, which had never been exposed to the heating regime, and they fired the block of foam at it as part of the investigation, and the reinforced carbon panel shattered instantly with the impact. And they had not been through the same number of heating cycles, 27 on Columbia, that some of them had. So when Columbia got impacted, it was the main difference of Columbia kept accelerating as the foam started decelerating, and your relative velocity at impact was so high that it shattered the RCC that was already very brittle, and RCC is the reinforced carbon panel. The grid fins are made of titanium. Oh my gosh, like what you would need to actually damage those? No. If a piece of if a tile did come off during, let's say, max Q, the moment where the tile would decelerate the most while the vehicle is accelerating the most in the air density environment, that is just ship is moving. By the way, ship is coming back down. While I was saying
Oh yeah,
that,
they're
but no,
lowering it down to the booster again.
yes, they are.
Yeah.
But
Looks like it,
basically,
yeah.
no, a tile is not going to affect the booster downstream in the same way that a piece of foam coming off the external tank would have affected the shuttle. Go.
Yeah, thank you for finishing that, Chris. But yep, ship going back down. So I wonder if this was just a bit of a reseat kind of deal.
Now, this could also be a reseat to see if they see the same thing that they saw
Well, yeah.
yesterday.
Right.
So just because they're going back down doesn't necessarily mean they'll stay down. Let's just set that particular expectation now. But they could stay down, so let's see what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Someone play No Time for Caution.
If I could just quickly
It's
add on
the
what we have.
final set down.
Oh,
Jeez. Demonetized. If I could just add really quickly to the end of Chris's last one while we have a second. In addition to the fact that these titanium grid fins are essentially one piece of titanium as opposed to multiple, which even makes it stronger, the other thing is that the ship is stacked directly on top of the booster as opposed to along the side of it, which was another reason why that foam was an issue. As opposed to falling down in a way, it could fall directly onto those wing leading edges and, for the most part, anywhere on that belly of the thermal tiles.
That's actually a really good point. Depending on where the tile would liberate from, the slipstream would actually pop it away from the vehicle
Right.
a little bit with that inline design. Yeah,
Steel
not
nuts.
necessarily a lawn. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I said titanium. I was thinking of Falcon. I meant steel.
Yes.
All right. What else we got? Trevor Welsh asking, how will orbital refilling work? Will the ship connect through the QD area or flamey end to flamey end? I believe the latest update is it's via the QD, and basically so the two vehicles will dock kind of side by side rather than aft to aft, which I know was a concept at one point, but I think they changed that.
Yeah, shiny side to shiny side is
There you
basically
go.
how
Nice,
they will
nice.
dock together. Yes, and then it'll be the quick disconnect. But as you said, Thomas, the original idea was engine to engine and go through there. But since that's not how they plan to do it now, that's also sort of the complicating factor of, oh, couldn't you just fuel the booster and continue to pump the propellants up the ship? They don't really have those ports anymore per the current design on the base of the ship since they plan to use the quick disconnect, which makes sense. Why have more than one fueling port when simply one will do?
There you go.
Also, is it just me or does it completely come back down now on top of Booster 7? It appears as if that was a very fast lower.
It does appear that they went actually for the contact on lower there, based on the angles that we're sort of seeing here. Whether it's not a full load bear is interesting, because yesterday we did see it wobble and tilt a little when they put it down for the first time, but then Michael's noting that we didn't see it wobble when they lifted it off. So the wobble might not be the thing to look for here, but it does look like they are down.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see any sort of gap between the two vehicles. Does look like they've lowered the ship the entirety of the way back down onto the booster. Hopefully just a minor fix.
Let's hope. Yeah, and it looks pretty stable at the moment, too.
We're going to give it some
Yeah.
time here. We got plenty of questions to ask in the meantime, so we'll keep an eye on it for a little bit.
Go for it.
We got some super chats coming in here. Most of these are brownie related, so my apologies. Cameron says perfectly spherical brownies, no edges solved. I think that's just a spherical edge. I don't think that's how that works physically, but I respect the idea. Raj Rob, I think is how you say that, says NSF bacon brownies. Has anyone put bacon in brownies?
I've had bacon and chocolate before, which is good.
Yeah.
I don't know about
Yeah,
brownie.
but not with a brownie. But I'm with you. I've had bacon and chocolate before, which is a good combination. The salty sweet is really good.
Man, I go with the chocolate covered pretzels. That's the salty sweet snack of choice for me. Very good.
Very good. Yes.
Yes.
Echo Deal says just add another egg to the brownies so they're not so horribly gooey. Sure. All right, I'm trying to get through these questions. I'm looking for legit questions, but there's just so many brownie questions. What
Well,
should
I
be
think
the
this view actually shows that we do have contact, most likely between the booster and the ship, that it is down on this particular viewing angle. And that one too.
Yes. Thank you, Michael, for the great views here.
Thank you, Michael and the Robot Army.
And the robot army, of course.
Let's see. What should be the required minimum and maximum thickness of brownies? I don't know what the tolerancing on a brownie is. Okay, I just like eating brownies.
A thick
Paul
edge
said-
piece. That's what's great.
No.
Oh, no.
Paul says a blade of brownie T-shirt, please no.
That sounds cursed.
All right, here's a Starship-related question. How many brownies can fit inside the Starship payload bay? Doesn't that depend on how big the brownies are?
It does.
Oh, no, not
Yeah,
this
so I
big.
don't think we can actually answer that one, unfortunately.
How big's the tray? We need to know how big it is. Dr. Holly's going to be proud. We need to know how big the tray is of each brownie and how, yes, and the mass of each brownie to know. Yes, there we go. Volume and mass. There we go.
These questions are turning into an infinite loop, kind of like the all-edge brownie pans.
Yes.
I'm ending this here. We've got a legitimate Starship question. Here we go. Do we know what will happen to the HLS Starship after it redocks with the Orion capsule? So crew leaves the surface of the moon, docks with Orion on HLS. Orion heads back to Earth. Where does HLS go?
Yeah, so NASA has sort of given a preliminary answer to this question, which is the contract that they have signed that is for Artemis 3 is just for Artemis 3. So the lunar starship, basically from NASA's perspective for Artemis 3, and there's going to be a huge caveat coming after this, is basically just after that, SpaceX, it is returned to SpaceX to do with it as they please. It is no longer a NASA contracted element. We do know, and plans can shift, but we do know that Artemis 4 does not plan to land on the lunar surface. It's more of a gateway mission. So there isn't necessarily one needed for Artemis 4. I believe the current plan is also that Artemis 5 is very similar to that, with Artemis 6 being a landing as well. Now, again, all of that can shift and change as NASA finalizes what they want the missions to be. But right now, it definitely would appear that even though the idea of reusing the lunar landers is on the table, that the first one for Artemis 3 is not earmarked for reuse.
I wonder if SpaceX could use that on some sort of internal mission, like would they ever have a private customer that goes to the surface?
Would they want surface operations themselves for different things?
Yeah.
The uses for it continue thereafter, just not necessarily for NASA, but it reverts basically back to SpaceX to do with as they please. Now, there's also something, since we could not and cannot get the lunar lander from Apollo 11 back, if they could find a way to put a heat shield on the first lunar variant, it would be nice to have that for posterity. But it would also be nice if they could just continue to use it instead of just bringing it back after one use for a museum piece.
Sure. All right, other questions coming in here and other super chats. Kaltenstein says, a blade of heat shields are just a bunch of carbon composites glued with epoxy, so using carbohydrates in the form of a brownie isn't a big stretch. Well, I guess.
Like that we're at that point, yes.
If the heat shield is supposed to protect from the superheated plasma during reentry, and Starship is made of steel, why not just electromagnetize the skin? Ionic plasma is negatively charged. Okay, hold on. I got to think about this for a second.
The heat shield is supposed to, if the heat, I'm going to reread the question while you read it internally, Thomas. If the heat shield is supposed to protect from the superheated plasma during reentry, and the Starship is made of steel, why not just electromagnetize the hull? Well, because it's not necessarily about that. It's about the reflection of that heat and how you handle it. Because there was a variant of Starship, right, that was just going to be polished a lot, so it reflected all of the heat, and you couldn't quite get there on the design. So parts of it have a heat shield, but that's why parts of it don't, because heat shield design at least with what you're really trying to do, is about either reflecting the heat away, which is the shiny side of Starship or the white side of the space shuttle, or allowing for some absorption of that heat for radiative cooling after the fact, which is what the tiles are for. If there's another way to do it, Thomas, go for it during atmospheric entry, aside from ablative.
Well, no, you're right, and I'm just adding. So I think to the purpose of the question, something else to keep in mind about how reentry vehicles work. The plasma itself is not like on the skin of the vehicle.
At two, yes.
In fact, the entire reason that when you do a reentry vehicle, it's almost always what we call a blunt body. If you look at a capsule, the reason the bigger end of the vehicle reenters first is because having that relatively flat or just slightly bowed heat shield shape actually pushes the plasma layer away from the vehicle. So you actually separate the plasma and the shock wave from the vehicle itself, and there's a gap which lowers the heating. And so trying to move the plasma away from the vehicle isn't actually the goal. The goal is to help the vehicle survive the remaining heating, even though there's already a separation between the shock wave where the plasma is and the vehicle itself. So maybe just a misunderstanding about where exactly the plasma is during reentry. It's not really against the edge of the vehicle. There's already a gap there based on compressible aerodynamics. That's why the Starship will reenter the way that it does. If Starship entered nose first, the plasma would get much, much closer to the vehicle and you'd have even higher heating. So there you go.
Which is why nose up angle of attack as you come in is preferable.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Good Gremlin says that someone left their phone on top of Booster 7 before they stacked, so they're just retrieving it. There you go.
That's where, they spied my iPhone and realized, it's on the vehicle.
It's like they're standing right under the engine going, what do you mean it's 300 meters away? And they just look up, oh no.
No.
300 meters is an exaggeration, but you get it.
Gotcha. Another super chat from Sean Howard. Thank you so much for that support. Appreciated that. Misk Wolf said the drone was stuck in the interstage. Okay, there's only so many jokes we can make about stuff being stuck in the interstage. Let's see, what else? Stephen saying, could they be testing the latch release mechanism? Think they're talking about the system between the ship and the booster, right?
Yeah.
So you want to take that?
As we were talking about before, part of that is what it's used to help disconnect the two vehicles in flight, so as it comes towards stage separation. And these are not really done with any force other than the actual force of the launch itself. So it's not like it's spring-loaded or like it has a motor that fires. So that separation is done naturally during the flight. So it's not something that you really be able to test well on the ground when you don't have that motion to help force the two vehicles to separate as that first booster stage starts to then turn itself towards re-entry position. And that turn will also help put S-24 on its way. Did I explain that well?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, cool.
Alright, let's see. Chris K says pointing hand up, flaming hand down. There we go. Appreciate the support there. Here's a question. William Hart says, when Starship is fully ready for Artemis 3, will SpaceX first flight around the moon before that mission? If so, do you think they could put a full-size cow mannequin over the moon? Oh, I get it.
Hey, diddle.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Sorry. But yeah, anyway, more seriously, do we know what the plan for flying Starship or HLS specifically around the moon before Artemis 3 is? Are there test flights planned?
Yes, there are. So part of the overall contract that SpaceX won for the Artemis 3 lunar landing is not just the actual landing itself. There is a full-up demonstration flight akin to Demo 1. Although NASA did caution that exactly what they will require of that demo, they had not yet fully established when SpaceX won the contract. So basically they want to demonstrate the system, but exactly how much of the Artemis 3 mission they want it to exactly mimic, they weren't sure about. And of course, there are going to be things like you won't have you might not put a fully functioning life support system on because that's a system that we all understand very well, and we don't really need to test things like that. Same reason Orion doesn't have it. For Artemis 1, same reason Dragon did not have it for Demo 1. We know those. So there will be some sort of a demonstration mission prior to the actual liftoff of the ship that will do the landing itself.
Gotcha.
As for the cow
Um,
mannequin, anything's possible. The cow
yeah,
did
sure.
jump over the moon after all.
But really quick, I do want to acknowledge there are trucks and things like driving through the roadblock and headed to the launch site. That is unlike for testing. That is not an indicator of they're done lifting or anything like that. The roadblock is still in effect. They only have to clear like the area immediately around the orbital launch site when they're doing lift operations, and so they can still send SpaceX personnel to the suborbital pad or other parts of the complex down there. Well, as long as the roadblock is still up, they are definitely still in an active situation regarding operations of some kind. So did want to address that. Just because there are vehicles driving towards the pad, that does not mean that they are done for the day or anything like that. Oh, geez, Cosmic Mustache saying, what do you mean, a European or an African brownie? We're really going into the Monty Python references again.
Is it a Leighton brownie?
What else? William Hart gifted a Red Team membership, so William, thank you so much. Here's a question. Tom the Toad says, do we think that SpaceX is waiting before adding more significant sound suppression?
It's a really interesting question.
It really is, and I admit the part of this that's throwing me is the waiting part. Waiting for what is sort of the reason I wouldn't. I don't know. Because they know they know the acoustic model environment. They know the computational fluid dynamics environment that's been modeled for the 33 Raptor engine ignition, so they would know how much they need at this point. If by waiting you just mean further into the process, well, if they're really going to try to lift off next month, I don't know what else they'd be waiting for. That's the only part of your question that gets me pause in terms of adding a more significant suppression system.
Right, especially after the last test that they did just a few weeks ago, I believe, of that system, which we have great video of too. But it seems like they've really improved the flow on it too, so I'm not sure if they would change it out or at this point just work with what they have and if possibly needed, upgrade it a bit.
Gotcha, thanks. Oh, alright. Sean asking, could Starship refuel before re-entry and use a re-entry burn to slow down enough that they don't need a heat shield or don't need as significant of a heat shield? Thoughts on that trade-off between just re-entering slower so that you need less of a heat shield versus just entering faster with a stronger heat shield and not having to refuel?
Well, this is where gravity becomes a problem.
Yep.
Because when you actually do your deorbit burn and slow down, right, what you're really doing in that moment is you're altering the trajectory, the shape of the orbit just enough to get it low enough into the atmosphere that you will not bounce back out. That basically you are committed to coming down to the ground. But after you stop the deorbit burn, you are now on a descending trajectory back down to Earth. And what happens when you start descending back down to Earth? Your velocity increases. So by the time, and this is where Kerbal Space Program is great because it gives you a really good physics representation of how this works. By the time you re-enter the atmosphere, you're actually going faster than you were when you started your deorbit burn. A lot of the time. So it's a weird sort of, I see the thinking, but you also don't want to be coming down at such a steep angle, which is where your version of slowing down actually occurs. Your re-entry angle becomes a lot steeper, and that increases your g-forces. So all of this is a balancing act between how steep you're coming in for the g-forces for the vehicle and the crew inside or the payload inside to survive, the heating regime you're going to be experiencing as you come in, what your vehicle design is for how it slows down and what its energy state is as it's reaching the landing location. So it's a really tricky balancing act based on your vehicle for how you re-enter. And the angle at which your orbit has to re-enter you at.
And even from a non-physics standpoint, from just a logistics standpoint, if you think about it, I mean, you've got the extra money of all that up there when you can just have the tiles, which for the most part are meant to be reused. You just refurbish them and launch it again. And again, the fact that you don't really need, like you're saying, that extra fuel for for deorbit burn. And then once you do get into the low atmosphere, that's the benefit of those tiles as well, is that as you belly flop in, you can use that friction from the atmosphere to help reduce it naturally without having to burn any fuel.
Hey, gotcha. Thank you guys. We're still keeping an eye on the ship and the booster. They seem to have placed the ship down onto the booster, but the question is, we gotta give it some time because we don't know if they'll see something again like they saw evidently last night that caused them to come out here and do some sort of reseeding or something, and waiting to see if they opt for a more permanent destack or something. So we're keeping an eye on it. Of course, we've got these cameras and these views because of all of your support. And if you're looking for another way to support the NSF stream and our coverage, we still have some new metal prints just from last night. Got some new images of the first time Ship 24 and Booster 7 were stacked on top of one another out there in Starbase. As you can see, some fresh images from Nick. I think some of them are actually from this morning as well. There's even some new ones. And that one's from Jack. We got the moon up top with a human for scale. So there's a new metal print as well. Moon. Oh no. There you go. But fresh metal prints of your latest Starship stack. Ship 24 on top of Booster 7. Full stack, full send. I like that one.
And I love that. I really love this one from Nick. The energy, the wave action, the nature, I love this one. I mean, I'm not kidding. I don't have wall space anymore for all of these. I need to get the edition, like in the shed. Like,
oh man, but there you go. So some new metal prints
see,
are out there on
Starbuck
the
agrees.
shop.
Yeah.
There you go. Shop.NASASpaceflight.com if you want to get your own. Also, plenty of other merch, not just other metal prints, but also T-shirts and hats and hoodies and things like that. So if you've got other, if you want another way to support the NSF team, merch is a great way to do that, and we greatly appreciate anyone who sends the support our way. All goes into expanding and improving our coverage, so we appreciate that. Got another question here from Travis saying, do we think they'll leave the chopsticks up if they do a static fire test, or will they lower them or remove them from the ship, I guess? What do we expect the chopstick arms to be doing when they get back into testing with a full stack?
I would expect to see them open up and sort of move away as they get into that testing. We have definitely seen them move up the stack. But one thing that I love about this angle is you don't appear to be able to raise them high enough to get them over the top of ship to lower them below ships. So they just open.
What do you think, Sawyer? Maybe we don't have Sawyer for a second. We'll have to come back to Sawyer. But yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm back. There we go. My apologies.
There you go. Yeah, I think I agree with you, Chris. So, Sawyer, what do you think? Chopsticks
yeah, I was
moving?
going to say they'll be open for sure. Would be my bet. The question now though is where they would place them. I would think they would want it to be similar to where it would be for launch, so they can test it as it would be in a launch day configuration.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, especially because I'm imagining if you kept the chopsticks attached, that might even mess with some of your vibration data that you want to get when you fire those engines, because you've got another point on the vehicle that's more or less fixed.
Exactly.
Got another super chat here from Steven saying, Plasma engineer here. Plasmas can be shaped by electromagnetics, but it's complex and heavy. The heat shield protects the ship from the huge amount of photons that the plasma gives off. Yeah, thank you, Steven, for another bit of input there. We appreciate that. Oh,
roadblocks down.
Yep.
All right, now there's not even a roadblock there. All right, well.
So that means it was a reseat, a realignment.
There we go. Beautiful.
All right. Well, I'll thank these last two super chats really quick here. Jirwa gifted 10 Red Team memberships, so thank you so much, Jirwa, for that support. And here's a quick question. Cavarali is maybe how you pronounce this. Is the tower tall enough for a stretched starship?
Stretched starship.
Okay, here's the thing. Here's my answer. Because people asked this when that other graphic came out with the propellant depot, which is like taller than the other variants. And people are like, well, how are you going to stack that? Because the tower is only so tall. But the lift points could simply be at the same height relative to the booster, and the ship just extends taller beyond that. So my guess is they could also just stretch the other variants as long as the lift points stay the same spot. The ship just might be taller than the tower itself when it's done, right?
Are there enough tracks on the tower segments for the arms to go higher? Like higher enough to accommodate the stretched booster.
Oh, you're saying the booster stretch.
Right, because there are those marks on the right. There's those tracks on the outside that the arms sort of go up. Right, how high up the tower do those go? Because that to me is the limiting factor of it.
Yeah, I was just assuming only stretch the ship, but you're right. If you also have to stretch the booster accordingly, then you've got a different problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you stretch ship, that works. But if it's the booster, yeah, I mean that's yeah, exactly. What do you mean by stretch Starship? There are two parts.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, sounds like a question we need to ask SpaceX, I think.
Yes, we'll put it on the list for Elon. Yes.
But all right, folks, I think we've seen just a quick reseat of Ship 24 on Booster 7. Hopefully that solved whatever issue they were having. A point of confidence that they didn't do it again after the first time, so maybe that's a good sign. But either way, you can always keep an eye on Ship 24 and Booster 7 stacked at the orbital launch site on Starbase Live, which I think is where we're going to throw you all now. Thanks for joining us for some quick commentated coverage as they adjusted the ship. Always want to be live when they're using the chopstick systems like that, but hopefully also answered some questions and maybe made you hungry for brownies or something. But really quick, going around the horn, my name is Thomas Burkhart. I'm the news director here at NASA Spaceflight. I was joined by Chris Gebhardt, assistant managing editor here at NSF. Chris, thanks for hopping on.
Absolutely my pleasure, Thomas.
And Sawyer, thank you so much for hopping on commentary as well, one of the newest NSF contributors, but fitting right in with the shuttle knowledge and brownie talk. Sawyer, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be a part of the team and glad to keep following everything at KSC and Starbase now.
Sounds great. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let's head on over to Starbase Live and hang out with the ship and booster a little bit more. But that's all for now. Thanks, everybody.